After 10 years of explaining Star Wars online, I've come across the same questions again and again. Today I'm answering 40 of the most frequently asked questions I've seen about Solo, a Star Wars story.
Look.
What was the significance of Han's gold dice? According to the book Crimson Climb, they originally belonged to Han's father and may have been the only memory Han had of his biological family. They became a symbol of luck for him, and he passed them to Kira, who held on to them for 3 years while she rose through the ranks of Crimson Dawn. She returned them to Han during their Kessel Run, and although we don't see it in the film itself, the dice were said to be used in his game of Sabacc, where he won the Millennium Falcon from Lando. You can see the dice in one scene of A New Hope hanging up in the cockpit of the ship as Chewbacca prepares to take off from Mos Eisley. After Han's death, the dice became a symbol of the scoundrel himself, serving as a memory for Luke, Leia, and Ben Solo.
Kira, remember the silo!
What was the silo on Corellia? It's where Kira lived before she became part of the White Worm Gang. It was first seen in the book Most Wanted, a young adult tie-in novel with Solo, a Star Wars story. It was some kind of work camp located in the swamplands of Corellia known as the Bottoms. The life expectancy there for orphans like Kira was less than 18 years, and conditions were bad enough that joining a gang led by Lady Proxima was preferable. That said, Kira did keep a hidden safe house located in the silo that she and Han used while they were on the run during the events of Most Wanted. What are Grindelids? They're the worm-like beings that controlled the White Worm Gang like Lady Proxima and Moloch. They were originally from the planet Persis 9, where a thick atmosphere blocked out their sun, causing them to become highly sensitive to sunlight. Protective armor and coats would shield them from burning and disintegrating into dust. In those kinds of outfits, they would appear to be humanoid, like Moloch, but as they aged, they would grow larger in size, like Proxima. They were a long-lived species, as we have seen Proxima during the time of the High Republic in the book Midnight Horizon, and we've also seen her during the rise of the First Order in some of the Star Wars Adventures comics. What were patrol troopers? They were a stormtrooper variant supposedly meant to support local planetary defense forces. For example, Corellia had the Corellian security forces, but the Empire didn't trust them to fully uphold Imperial law, so they sent in reinforcements in the form of patrol troopers who appeared under the guise of assisting the local police, although the long-term goal was to completely replace Coruscant with completely loyal Imperial soldiers. Patrol troopers were most commonly deployed to urban environments, and their armor shared many similarities with scout troopers.
Learn valuable skills.
Was the Imperial March an in-universe song? It was. It was composed by Bellani Savitt, a musician during the time of the Galactic Republic that eventually became a Grand Admiral in the Imperial Navy. The piece was officially titled Glory of the Empire, but was also known as the Imperial March. While John Williams' original composition is written in the minor key, Kevin Kiner first used a major key version of the song in the Star Wars Rebels episode Empire Day in 2014. John Powell used the motif again in Solo, a Star Wars story, heard by Han Solo just before he joins the Galactic Empire. How did Han Solo wind up fighting on Mimban? The story of his 3-year time jump is told in the comic Han Solo Imperial Cadet and deleted scenes for the film. He first headed to the Carida Naval Academy, where he struggled to fit in with his fellow students and consistently butted heads with a pilot named Bylert Valance. They were stuck on a squadron together, and when Valance was shot down behind enemy lines, Solo defied orders and led a team to rescue him. The movie's deleted scene as well as the novelization for the film tell a very similar story. While flying a TIE Brute, Han once again defied a direct order to leave a squad mate to die. He rescued his wingmate but damaged his fighter in the process. His second offense at disobedience resulted in his immediate transfer to the infantry on Mimban.
Your Empire needs you! Troopers forward!
Why is the Empire fighting on Mimban? The short version is because it was a planet rich in hyperbarade, a valuable mineral required for turbolaser technology. The long version is that Mimban was first invaded by the Confederacy of Independent Systems during the Clone Wars so they could harvest hyperbarade. The Republic sent their 224th Division to train and fight alongside a Mimbanese liberation movement. From that point on, the once green planet became an endless, muddy battlefield. When the Clone Wars came to an end, the Republic troops who once aided the Mimbanese became an occupying force, and the fighting continued, similar to what happened after the Siege of Mandalore. By the time of Solo, the Mimbanese people had been in a constant war for about 12 years. Who is the other member of Beckett's crew on Mimban? In deleted scenes you can watch on Disney+, we get a longer look at an imposing character seen fighting alongside Beckett, Val, Rio, and Han named Corso. He carries a massive repeating blaster rifle but is killed in the midst of the fighting. His loss meant Beckett's crew was short a man, specifically their muscle, so when Han and Chewbacca chase them down while they're stealing the AT hauler, Rio suggests the Wookiee might be a good replacement for Corso, and Han is just brought along for the ride. More of Corso's story can be read in the Solo novelization and visual guide.
Just wondering what our objective is, Lieutenant.
Why do we see so many normal Imperial Army troopers instead of stormtroopers on Minbin? All stormtroopers were part of the Imperial Army, but not every member of the Army was a stormtrooper. According to the Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, by the time of the Battle of Yavin, stormtroopers and their many variants made up the bulk of the Imperial infantry, but it took several years for the stormtrooper program to reach that point. So at the time of Solo, for example, regular Army troopers were a far more common sight. Even 5 years later on Ferrix, Imperial forces were largely made up of standard soldiers, and a handful of stormtroopers and even death troopers were brought in for support. Again, according to the Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, conflicts and crises had to escalate through numerous levels of the military's internal ranking criteria before they would be considered serious enough to justify stormtroopers' deployment. How did Chewbacca wind up in the pit on Minbin? The answer can be found in the Solo: A Star Wars Story Jr. novel by Joe Schreiber. Chewie was captured by slave traders on Kashyyyk, separated from his family, and put to work cutting down the mighty Rocher trees of his homeworld. He briefly escaped and went on the run, but was betrayed by a bounty hunter according to the Solo official guide, or a Kowakian monkey lizard according to the Junior novel. So maybe a Kowakian monkey lizard bounty hunter was involved in his recapture? Anyway, Chewie was put on a prison train where he again nearly escaped, but sacrificed his own freedom to save another. He was transferred between several Imperial prisons until he finally wound up on Minbin, where he remained for what the Junior novel describes as endless days. Did Chewbacca eat people while he was stuck in the pit? No, the Solo novelization by Mur Lafferty gives a little bit of Chewie's perspective during his fight with Han. He had been in the pit for several days, and the guards threw him pieces of meat every once in a while. The remains we can see in the pit appear to be from a droid they likely tossed in to make Chewie fight for entertainment. But according to the Wookiees' inner dialogue, Han was the first living being they had thrown down, and he had no intention of eating him.
And I'm finally gonna learn how to play that valichord.
What was a valichord? Beckett intended to learn to play the instrument if he ever retired, and it seems like it would have been an impressive undertaking. It looks like a cross between a harp and a piano. It was first described in the book Aftermath by Chuck Wendig, where it's said to be played by tapping on keys like a piano, but the strings were all exposed and visible more like a harp. Concept art can be found of a Gran playing the instrument in Solo, but the sequence wasn't included in the final production.
Ready your harpoons! Move in!
Are the Cloud Riders related to the Nile? The Nile were a group of raiders from the High Republic era who terrorized the Outer Rim wearing distinctive armor that included intimidating masks. Their organization was broken into groups called Tempests, Storms, Clouds, and Strikes, and their ships were armed with harpoons that could rip enemy ships apart. So there are several interesting connections to be made between the Nile and the Cloud Riders. For now, I think I'll chalk it all up to coincidence, but you never know. Maybe some small group of surviving Nile evolved over the course of the next 2 centuries, and instead of raiding the citizens of the galaxy, began raiding the Empire and the criminal syndicates instead. There's a big enough gap in the timeline that I could see that theory being proven true.
How did you get out?
I didn't.
How did Kira get into Crimson Dawn? The most detailed version of that story is in the novel Crimson Climb by E.K. Johnston. After she was recaptured by the White Worms, Proxima considered killing her, but decided it was more profitable to sell her to a slaver named Sarkin Eneb. He owed debts to Dryden Voss, and when Crimson Dawn came to collect, they were impressed with Kira's fortitude and forced Sarkin to hand her over along with his credits. She attempted to escape Dryden's yacht several times, eventually going so far as to kill one of her guards. Voss took that as a sign of her potential and offered her a place within the Dawn. He personally trained her, and she was sent on dangerous missions where she was forced to outmaneuver her personal rivals within the criminal syndicate. She bested all of her opposition and eventually earned the honor of meeting the true leader of Crimson Dawn 1 or 2 years before she was reunited with Han.
Test me! Test me one more time, you see.
What species is Dryden Voss? We don't know. I never want to put a non-answer into these videos, but I've seen this question a lot, and that is the answer right now. He is a near human, and the red markings on his face are similar to those seen on a Lego Star Wars character named Nare, but we don't know her species either. Dryden was originally going to be an alien resembling a mountain lion, maybe like his Hyliban guards. That version of the character was played by Michael Kenneth Williams, who was unable to return for the film's reshoots and had to be recast. Other concepts for Dryden included a bird-like species, a reptile, and a Lasat like Zeb from Star Wars Rebels. But in the end, Dryden was more simply a near-human. Does Dryden Voss have the crystal skull from Indiana Jones in his office? No, I've seen a lot of people make that mistake, and for good reason. They look very close to one another, but Dryden's skull is the masthead of Zim the Despot, which is a reference to one of the very earliest Star Wars books, Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. That book is about Han Solo's search for the lost treasure of an ancient warlord named Zim, so the skull in Dryden's office is just a fun Easter egg. But if you're disappointed that it wasn't the skull from Indiana Jones, don't worry, because you can still find it in Star Wars in the Clone Wars episode Wookiee Hunt.
So this is, Sabak?
Sabak.
What are the rules to Sabak? It depends on which version of Sabak you're playing, but the longest running and most common version is basically like Blackjack. Players attempt to reach a hand value of 23 instead of 21 without going over that number. The best hand is called the Idiot's Array, which is a hand including the face card the Idiot, which has a value of 0, along with 1, 2, and 1, 3. But there were other variants, like Corellian Spike, in which the goal was to have a hand closest to 0 as possible. Or in Star Wars Outlaws, we see Kessel Sabak, where players only held 2 cards at a time, hoping to get the pair with the lowest value. Planets and cultures seem to develop their own versions of Sabak across the galaxy. Who was Therm Scissorpunch? Thermoculus Crescent Volt Scissorpunch was a long-lived Nephrin who was a pirate alongside Maz Kanata during the time of the High Republic. He took part in the Battle of Jeddah, fighting with allies that included Dexter Jetster from Attack of the Clones. Over a century later, Therm and Dex still served with the Pirate Queen of Takodana. He was a capable fighter, but a mediocre gambler and sabacc player. He was also noted to be a sore loser. Most of his story can be seen in the second phase of the High Republic Adventures comics.
She's definitely going.
Oh, why? Because you're my organic overlord?
How did Lando meet L337? Shockingly, we don't know for sure. That seems like something that would have been answered in a comic or the novelization or something, but this is one of those rare cases of Star Wars not filling in a detail. I'm sure we'll find out eventually, but for now, the best answer we have is from speculation between Donald Glover and Phoebe Waller-Bridge. They guessed that their first meeting was in a bar somewhere and probably started violently.
Looks to me like they impounded your ship, Lando.
Why was the Millennium Falcon impounded on Vandor? The Lando comic Double or Nothing has the answer. Shortly before the events of Solo, Lando was hired to smuggle a group of freedom fighters to the planet Kolgrun. The mission spiraled out of control and he begrudgingly helped rescue several organic and droid slaves. Unfortunately, that meant he and L337 had to get off the Falcon and join the fighting, leaving it to be taken by the Empire. They escaped with the freed slaves on a shuttle and followed the Falcon's transponder to where it had been impounded on Vandor.
My dad worked the line at the CEC plant before he got laid off.
What do we know about Han Solo's father? We know he worked at the Corellian Engineering Corporation building YT-1300s, his name was Oven, and Han's gold dice once belonged to him. The Solo novelization states that Oven abandoned Han, and the reference book Star Wars Timeline says he died around the same time. But Han didn't know that, and in the Han Solo and Chewbacca comic, a mercenary named Corbus Tyra used that to his advantage. He posed as Oven and slowly gained Han's trust, hoping to steal a valuable artifact from Solo and Jabba the Hutt.
You're gonna have to do that thing again later.
Yeah.
Were Lando and L337 romantic with one another? I don't think so. I do think they had feelings for one another, but in my opinion, L3 makes it clear nothing has ever happened between them. She specifically says that sometimes she thinks maybe, but no. To me, that's a clear statement that nothing romantically intimate has happened between Lando and L3, but they definitely seem to have a bickering married couple style relationship.
No, you can't wipe them off. They're holograms.
Did Chewbacca break the Millennium Falcon's holochess table? Yes. When Chewbacca is first learning to play Dedrick, he gets angry and smashes the table, causing 2 of the holographic figures to flicker out of existence, changing the piece count from 10 to 8. In the original Star Wars, 10 stop-motion creatures were created for the holochess sequence. George Lucas chose 8 of them to appear in the final film. Solo: A Star Wars Story reintroduced the remaining 2 back into the game as a fun little Easter egg, at least until Chewie broke the table.
Mining colonies are the worst.
Is there more to the planet Kessel than just spice mines? Yes, we only see the worst part of Kessel in Solo: A Star Wars Story and Star Wars Rebels, but the Clone Wars showed us a whole different side of the planet. The Season 7 episode Deal No Deal has Ahsoka Tano join the Martez sisters on a mission through the Euphrates Maelstrom to Kessel, where they meet contacts on the beautiful, unspoiled side of the planet. That idea originally came from George Lucas around 2009 and was finally seen in 2020. Who was the Pike Syndicate? They were mostly known for their activity in the spice trade of the galaxy. Their base of operations was on their homeworld of Obadiah, which happened to be located near the spice mines of Kessel, where much of the galaxy's spice was harvested. Their proximity to the end of the notorious Kessel Run allowed them to control the distribution of that spice, but they also dabbled in other criminal activity like the assassination of Jedi Master Sifo Dyas at the request of Darth Tyrannus. Near the end of the Clone Wars, they joined Maul's Shadow Collective. After losing many of their people, they would attempt to leave Maul's service, but he kept them under his thumb after the creation of Crimson Dawn. When Jabba the Hutt perished on Tatooine, the Pikes began to move into his territory, where they met opposition from Boba Fett's Tusken tribe and the marshal known as Cobb Vanth. They continued to push into the desert world, but were eventually defeated. Over a decade later, the Pike Syndicate still existed, but their influence in the galaxy had faded dramatically.
Teras Kasi. Dryden taught me.
What is Teras Kasi? It was a hand-to-hand martial art created to fight Force-sensitive beings like Jedi. It was a rare sight in the galaxy, but the Imperial Royal Guard were trained in the fighting style, and Maul ensured that the leaders of Crimson Dawn like Dryden Voss and Kira were also ready to combat any Force-sensitives they came across. It was first created for the Shadows of the Empire novel by Steve Perry, who himself was a practitioner of Indonesian martial arts. Teras Kasi is actually Finnish for steel hand. The fighting style gained notoriety after the release of the critically panned 1997 fighting game Masters of Teras Kasi, which honestly I say it's time we got a remake. If Shaq Fu can get a sequel, why not Masters of Teras Kasi? What happened to the liberated Kessel miners? It sounds like many of them actually escaped and made it off the planet. We know of at least two concrete examples. The first is the Wookiee Sagwa, who we see rescued by Chewbacca and later fleeing with a human named Tak. We next see him about 13 years later on Nar Shaddaa in the Star Wars comics during the War of the Bounty Hunters. He helps Chewie and Luke Skywalker track down Boba Fett and joins the Rebel Alliance shortly after. We also know the story of one of the droids liberated by L337. AL-1L3 escaped the mining colony and redesigned herself for years, similar to the way L3 had. She was present for the Battle of Exegol and the celebration afterwards on Agen Kloss. Hopefully many of the other freed slaves escaped alongside her and Sagwa. What is a TIE Brute? Also known as the Heavy TIE Fighter, the Brute was a TIE variant outfitted with an extra weapons pod that carried 2 additional laser cannons. It contained a droid brain, similar to the way many Rebel starfighters utilized astromech droid assistants. The TIE Brute wasn't widely seen throughout the Galactic Civil War, but was in use at least shortly after the Battle of Hoth. The First Order also used their own version of the Heavy TIE Fighter after the destruction of the New Republic. The ship's design was actually first developed in concept art for The Force Awakens as an option for the Special Forces TIE Fighter.
She's part of the ship now.
What happened to L337 after she was installed into the Millennium Falcon? She became a part of the ship, able to access cams and audio sensors in every room. She understandably resisted being stuck inside a ship's computer, but the Falcon itself convinced her to help save Lando and the others. Their 2 brains joined together to become something new. Several of L3's sound effects before she became part of the ship were taken from the original sound design for the Falcon in the original trilogy, and 3PO's comments about the ship's unusual dialect is also a reference to her influence. Lando and Han continued to interact with her in several later stories in the Star Wars comics, books like Last Shot, and the novelization for The Rise of Skywalker. What is a Suma Verminoth? Similar to the space slug from The Empire Strikes Back, they were massive creatures that were able to survive in the vacuum of space. The species' most prominent appearance was in Solo, but the remains of one can be seen in The Rise of Skywalker during the approach to Exegol. Many Suma Verminoth existed in and around the Red Honeycomb Zone, although they were described as a subspecies of the one seen during the Kessel Run. They had one massive eye instead of several, and were able to perform psychic attacks through the Force, maybe thanks to their close proximity to a Sith-affiliated planet.
Just did the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs.
How does the Kessel Run work? As Lando states in the movie, the safest way through the Kessel Run is a winding path that stretches for about 20 parsecs. Han dangerously traveling into the Maelstrom was insanely risky, and we see the Millennium Falcon nearly perishing to Carbonbergs, Asuma Verminoth, and the Maw. But his gamble paid off, and he cut the distance nearly in half, if you round down. Who are the Cloud Riders in Star Wars Legends? They were introduced in some of the very earliest Star Wars comics by Marvel mere months after the release of A New Hope. They were still a swoop gang, but were led by a villain named Sergi X Arrogantis. They terrorized a village on the planet Aduba 3 until Han Solo and Chewbacca put together a Seven Samurai or Magnificent Seven style crew of misfits to defeat them. So the Cloud Riders of canon don't resemble their Legends inspiration much at all, since they were seen as heroic fighters for the people against the oppression of the Empire and the criminal syndicates. Who is Warwick Davis's character in Solo? He plays one of the members of the Cloud Riders named Weasel, who actually appeared in Star Wars before. In 1999, Warwick played a background character with no lines during the pod race in The Phantom Menace. Back then, he was said to be a thief working for the Hutt clan and lost a lot of credits betting on Sebulba to win the Boonta Eve Classic. At some point, he turned against the Hutts and began working with the Cloud Riders, fighting the cruelty of all the criminal syndicates. By the time of Solo, Weasel was Enfys Nest's most trusted lieutenant and worked as a spy for the Band of Marauders.
Crimson Dawn and the rest of the 5 syndicates have committed unspeakable crimes across the galaxy.
Who are the 5 major criminal syndicates of the Star Wars galaxy? At the time of Solo: A Star Wars Story, when the 5 were first prominently mentioned, they were Crimson Dawn, the Hutt Cartel, the Pike Syndicate, Black Sun, and the Crymora Syndicate. While Maul was alive, they all maintained an alliance as the former Sith Lord kept them in line. Crimson Dawn and the Pike Syndicate are both seen in the film, and the Hutt Cartel was, of course, run by Hutts like Jabba, seen in Return of the Jedi, The Book of Boba Fett, and The Clone Wars. Black Sun was first created for Shadows of the Empire and was featured in The Clone Wars, still under the leadership of Falleen nobles. The Crymora Syndicate is largely a mystery, as they haven't had any major appearances. We do know they were made up of 5 smaller criminal groups, including the Droid Gotra, the Rain Clan, the Wandering Star, the Baldemiro family, and apparently some additional Hutts.
No, I mean, how'd you do it? Looks exactly like the real thing.
How does coaxium or hyperfuel work? It was discovered by scientists who studied Purrgil, the space whale seen in Star Wars Rebels and Ahsoka that had the natural ability to travel through hyperspace. They could do so by ingesting a gas called Cluzon-36. Breakthroughs in the study of Cluzon-36 led to the discovery of unrefined coaxium, which formed naturally on planets with strong interstellar energy like Kessel, for example. Once harvested, coaxium could be refined into hyperfuel, which was used to power hyperdrives. This is different from standard starship fuels like rhydonium, which was more likely used to power sublight engines.
I'm on my way.
What happened to Kira after the events of Solo: A Star Wars Story? A lot. There is a pretty big gap between the movie and her next appearance. We know that sometime over the course of the next 13 or so years, she was mentored and trained by Darth Maul, who told her the truth about Palpatine's identity as a Sith Lord. Maul was eventually killed by Obi-Wan Kenobi, for good this time, and Kira took control of Crimson Dawn. The Syndicate had lost most of its power by then, but she secretly rebuilt and plotted to bring down the Sith to more evenly distribute power across the galaxy. After the events of The Empire Strikes Back, she stole Han's carbonite slab and held an auction with the purpose of throwing the criminal underworld and the Empire into chaos. While they all fought, she chased after a relic called the Fermata Cage, which could supposedly hold a being in stasis indefinitely. She attempted to unleash it on Darth Vader and Palpatine, but her plot was foiled by her former allies, the Knights of Ren. Crimson Dawn was destroyed once and for all, and Kira escaped, going into hiding.
That's it. Soul loaded.
What happened to all the refined coaxium Han gave to Enfys Nest? We find out in the epilogue for the novelization of the movie by Mur Lafferty. There we see a meeting between Enfys Nest and Saw Gerrera, who also brings a young Jyn Erso along with him. Enfys gives them all the coaxium, and from there we don't know its fate. At this point in the timeline, Saw probably had a better relationship with other rebels, so hopefully he shared it around, or maybe he sold it for funds or other kinds of supplies.
If you'd only had this little green Psylop.
What is a Psylop in Sabacc? That depends on what variant of Sabacc you're playing. In Corellian Spike, which is the variant Han and Lando play at the end of the movie, the Psylop has a value of 0, because Psylop is Old Corellian for idiot. It was a necessary card to create the top hand in Sabacc, the Idiot's Array, but the Psylop served other functions in the many versions of Sabacc that could be found throughout the galaxy. In Star Wars Outlaws, we see Kessel Sabacc, where the Psylop will replicate the other card in a player's hand. In that version, 2 Psylops is the best hand a player can have.
Fair and square, baby. Fair and square.
Did Han cheat when he won the Millennium Falcon from Lando? I'm gonna go with yes, and I don't count him stealing Lando's card, that was just preventing him from cheating. Issue 5 of the Star Wars comic series by Jason Aaron suggests that both Han and Lando were cheating, Han just cheated better. I think it's possible Star Wars Outlaws showed us how he cheated too. Han won the Falcon from Lando while playing the Corellian Spike variant of Sabacc, which involved rolling dice to randomize the cards in each player's hands. It's long been said that Han used his gold dice in that fateful game. Star Wars Outlaws shows Kay Vess cheating by using magnetized dice in games of Sabacc, so maybe Han was able to do something similar in his game with Lando. I'm purely speculating, I can't say for sure that he cheated, I just think he did. Weren't Tag and Bink supposed to appear in Solo? Those characters were the stars of the Tag and Bink Star Wars comics that were never canon, but were meant to show 2 bumbling background characters experiencing the galaxy through their eyes, kinda like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in Hamlet, who served as inspiration for Tag and Bink. During production for Solo, director Ron Howard tweeted a picture of co-writer John Kasdan and assistant director Toby Hefferman in costume with the hashtag Tag and Bink. Their very brief appearance was cut for time, but can be found in the deleted scenes for the film, and they were included in the visual guide for Solo as well. But that brings us to the end of the most frequently asked questions I've seen about Solo: A Star Wars Story. If you liked this video, check out the ones I've already done answering questions for the original, prequel, and sequel trilogies. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page for even more Star Wars talk. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.